Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and today we're finishing up this sort of three-part series that we do whenever a new set comes out here on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the best way to upgrade some of your favorite decks from previous formats. And, all of the new cards that came out in Eevee Grove are really cool. There's a lot of really strong cards, but some of them are complementary cards and not necessarily cards that you build your entire deck around. I'm looking at you, Sylveon. There's going to be a lot of updates to what decks were played in previous formats, how they're played now. That's what this video is all about. So let's just sort of dive right into it, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Again, this is the end of sort of our three-part series. A couple days ago, we did our best decks for ranked mode, and then we did our best new decks video, and then today we're doing our upgraded deck lists. And yeah, there it is. So let's get right into it, guys. Tomorrow will be Meta Monday. We're going to review the results from this weekend's Ursa Days tournament. You're not going to want to miss that. It's the first large tournament of this new metagame. Going to give us a ton of great data. And then on Tuesday, we'll do our initial kind of tier list, our meta tier list for this new format. Really, really excited about all of that. I appreciate all of the support, guys. Let's dive right into it. So the first deck list that we're taking a look at today is actually going to be Dark Arceus. When I say Dark Arceus, I really mean Crobat and Arceus, which was played in a variety of different ways over the last couple of formats, but this is still a strong deck list, and I really like the inclusion of Snorlax EX in here. It's mainly used as a leadoff Pokemon for us to basically soak up a bunch of damage, and then, of course, we can come in, play the Ilima supporter card, scoop up Snorlax, bring it back up into our hand, and then our opponent has to deal with both Crobat and Arceus. So that's sort of the bread and butter for this list. One thing that I was thinking about was that there's some kind of synergy between Arceus and Snorlax because, of course, they are both colorless Pokemon. Crobat seems to be the #1 option in terms of Pokemon that we pair with Arceus, but I think that this is a lot, this particular kind of combination of Arceus and Snorlax both being colorless Pokemon, and of course all of the other Pokemon that are good with Arceus, I feel like we've yet to tap the full potential of what Arceus EX can do when paired with Snorlax. Now, Snorlax isn't a super popular Pokemon early on in this metagame. It can be really strong with Ilima, and of course it is a colorless attacker. However, the one thing with Snorlax that I think a lot of people have learned is that, if it is in the active spot, we don't have to attack it, right? Our opponent can't scoop it up unless we deal damage to it. There are Pokemon in the game that can set up and deal enough damage in one turn to KO Snorlax EX, especially if they don't have a Giant Cape. So a deck like this, we might be thinking about playing a Giant Cape or two just to attach to that Snorlax, bring it at 180 HP, and then keep it out of range of getting 1-hit KO'd, because that's really the downside to Snorlax, is that your opponent doesn't have to attack it, and it has a retreat cost of 4, so there's not a great way for us to get it out of the active spot. But Snorlax is really, really cool, and I think it does synergize well with this Crobat Arceus package. If your opponent is stalling, then that's honestly not that bad, because we're putting a lot of pressure on them with Crobat and then setting up an Arceus on the bench, theoretically allowing you to kind of sweep through your opponent. Again, things like Giant Cape might be really useful for a list like this, but again, I really like this particular combination, and I think that Dark Arceus hasn't seen a ton of play early on in this format, but was one of the best decks in the last couple of formats, so I do think it deserves some mention. I wanted to showcase it here. Like I said, a lot of untapped potential with Arceus in this format right now. I think Crobat probably the best Pokemon to pair with Arceus. It allows us to kind of counter Oricorio, even though it's not seeing that much play. And yeah, Snorlax with Ilma can be really fun, but as somebody did point out, your opponent doesn't have to attack Snorlax and then, put damage onto it, so we can't scoop it up. Now, we can, of course, just threaten the attachments to Snorlax to kind of speed up that process, but then we're not attaching to Arceus, right? So it can be a little bit of an awkward scenario, especially in decks where your opponent doesn't have to attack Snorlax, or it can 1-hit KO Snorlax. Keep that in mind. Anyway, there it is, Arceus, Snorlax, and Crobat. I thought this was a fun deck. I think previously people played it with Darkrai, but anyway, here it is. I wanted to showcase it again, sort of an updated and upgraded version of Arceus and Crobat. However, it might not end up catching on, and it might not kind of fit too well in the metagame. That's one thing I will say about all these decks, is that early on in the format, people are testing different stuff. They're doing quite well with them in some scenarios. All of the deck lists in this particular video have performed well in early competitions, but that doesn't mean they'll necessarily catch on, so you got to keep that in mind as well. Anyway, let's move on. The next one is going to be Infernape, and another example of something where, Infernape wasn't necessarily meta at any given point in time, and the synergy between Infernape EX and Flareon is quite interesting. This was something that people have been speculating for quite some time. I included this in the video because I know some people have been asking about the Infernape Flareon combination. In my personal opinion, I honestly don't actually think this deck is that good. I think that Infernape struggles in a lot of ways. Yes, we're playing one copy of red and we have Eevee back to attack with our Flareon. However, I just don't think Infernape does enough damage. 170 HP and 140 damage when we could just be playing Charizard, which effectively can still attack on its third turn. And yeah, and Charizard has 180 HP and does 150. So theoretically speaking, Charizard is just a bit better than Infernape, but the energy discard that Infernape does synergize well with Flareon. We can go ahead, use the Combust ability, and generate those energies back from the discard pile onto our Flareon EX. And then we're playing the small Flareon, the new assisting heater of Flareon is what this attack's called, just to kind of set up our Pokemon on our bench. So it's not a terrible leadoff option. However, all of these Pokemon don't feel great going first because we can't attack on that first turn. So we have to kind of wait, or we can attach rather. So we have to wait until like turn 3 to get the attacks off. Kind of the main downside, I believe, with Infernape. So I'm not super high on Infernape. I did want to include it because I know some people have been asking about it. And theoretically, this could be better than the other versions of Infernape back in the day. But again, Infernape wasn't necessarily meta at any given point in time. And I don't think Flareon is going to make Infernape meta. We have talked about a couple different Flareon decks over the last few days. I think the best way to play Flareon currently is either going to be with Turtonator in a pure fire Flareon deck, or what some people have been playing is with Leafeon. That's a really spicy list, and we'll showcase it in one point or another. Shout out to Jody. That's who I found that list from. We're not talking about it in today's video because it's kind of a new deck, but we'll cover it at some point. But anyway, that deck seems to be doing quite well. Definitely quite interesting. So yeah, here it is. Incineroar, or not Incineroar, sorry. Infernape and Flareon. We do have an Incineroar deck coming up. Spoiler alert. I wanted to showcase it, like I said, just because some people have asked about it. I don't think it's that good. Unfortunately, 140, we're just not taking KOs on a lot of Pokemon, especially with Giant Cape running around. And Infernape really can attack twice in a row. Theoretically speaking, we could play Dawn and we could just use Flareon as sort of this energy recycler to play Combust, bring it back onto Flareon, and then Dawn it back up to Infernape. That could be really interesting. But of course, this deck list isn't really playing that particular strategy, and it's probably a bit awkward because it requires a stage 2 Pokemon and a stage 1 Pokemon both on the board at one time. Might be a little bit difficult to do that. But anyway, here you go. Here is Infernape. I just wanted to mention it. Okay, now moving into some stuff that has been directly impacting the metagame and has been performing really well over the last, just a couple of days. So far, even in the Ursa Days tournament, some of these decks are actually performing quite well. But again, we'll cover it all tomorrow. So this is Magnezone. And instead of playing, Oricorio and playing Shiinotic, which definitely is probably one of the better decks of the last couple of formats, we are pairing this with Sylveon EX. So prepare, because a lot of the decks in this video are just going to be new decks with Sylveon added in. Sylveon ends up being one of the best support type Pokemon, is what I'll say. And it just draws you cards. So I know a lot of people were a little bit confused as to, why Sylveon might be good or where we would be playing Sylveon. The whole idea with Sylveon EX is that, you play 2 cards in your deck effectively, Eevee and a Sylveon, to draw 2 cards. And now that might seem counterproductive, right? But in theory, what it's doing is making your deck faster, right? You're just kind of reducing effectively the cards that are in your deck. Imagine playing 16 cards in your deck. That would be broken, right? Because, of course, we would draw through our deck quicker. We'd have less cards that aren't useful in that moment. That's really what Sylveon does. Magnezone has always kind of been paired with Shiinotic, or at least in the recent history. I do think Shiinotic probably is better in terms of its synergizing with Magnezone, because the thing with Magnezone, and this is going to get into the weeds a little bit from a statistical standpoint, but Magnezone is one of the few Stage 2 Pokemon that requires you to evolve into its Stage 1 Pokemon, being Magneton. Magneton is really great. It's the main reason why Magnezone is so good. We can use Volt Charge, accelerate those energies to Magnezone, and then we don't have to actually commit 3 energies to it to be able to attack. If we do go Magnemite, Magneton, Magnezone within 3 turns, we're guaranteed to be able to attack with Magnezone, which is really strong, even when we're going first. That's a big upside to Magnezone. Shiinotic searches your deck for Pokemon specifically. So in the scenario of Magnezone, where we want that middle evolution, I think Shiinotic might be a bit better just from a mathematical perspective than Sylveon is. However, when we're playing Sylveon in a list like this, we can play both Psychic and Electric energies. So we can technically attack with Magnezone and Sylveon pretty consistently, and I do think that that's kind of an upside. If we have to, we can do some damage with Sylveon, then go into Magnezone, or if we get a little bit lucky, we can go Magnezone into Magnezone and then finish the game with Sylveon. We do have one Giant Cape, which is going to allow Sylveon to live attacks from basically everything in the format, including Solgaleo, unless they play red, including Charizard, including Giratina, things like that. Magnezone with Giant Cape has 160 HP, and last time I checked, you are living an attack from a Rampardos, which is absolutely broken. Now, people, again, you have to just sort of think real quickly, why would I play Magnezone? Like, what is it actually good at? The main reason why Magnezone is good, or at least has been good in previous formats, is because it's really strong against Silvally specifically. Because with 140 HP and dealing 110 damage, it really is kind of the anti-Silvally button. We can live an attack and pretty easily kind of coast through one-hit KOing Silvallies, and that's definitely the biggest upside to Magnezone, especially with Giant Cape. We're out of range of even a Type Null and a Silvally attack, so that's kind of the main upside to Magnezone, is that it's kind of a counter Silvally card. Silvally is fairly common in the format, but yeah, I think Magnezone continues to be one of the better Pokemon in Pokemon Pocket. So this version here, I'm on the fence whether this is better than just playing pure electric type Silvally and pairing it with Shiinotic and maybe one Oricorio. I think that version's really good. Late in the last format, we actually played like a Magnezone version with like Pikachu and Zeraora and stuff, which I thought was really good as well. I just think Magnezone is a really strong card, and I think that this way to play it actually does make some sense. We'll have to see if it ends up being more popular. Again, this is more of a dual energy archetype. We can utilize Sylveon as an attacking option. If we're playing pure lightning energies, we're not, of course, playing Sylveon, and we would probably just play Oricorio and Shiinotic a little bit more so. If we go back, of course, this deck is playing fire energies, this deck is playing dark energies. I just wanted to confirm that. I always forget to mention the energy types, but again, I always think it's obvious, but no, I mean, this deck is playing just dark, and then this deck is playing just fire. But this deck list here would be playing both psychic and electric energies, which I guess is kind of the advantage. One of the few decks where we're pairing Sylveon in, that Sylveon is actually an attacking option. 70 damage is 70 damage. I mean, 110 plus 70 is 180. So there you go. That is actually a pretty good combo in terms of, you know, doing 180 damage. However, most of these 180 HP stage 2 Pokemon are playing Lily, so that might be kind of an argument there. But yeah, Magnezone with Giant Cape lives attacks from basically everything. It's the anti-Silvally Pokemon. Here's a new flavor of Magnezone. We'll have to see if this ends up being better than the Shiinotic version. I'll be really interested to see. But anyway, there it is. Prepare, because there's going to be a lot of Sylveon in this video. Next up, we've got Decidueye. So again, I think that Decidueye was a Pokemon that was totally fine in the previous format, and has the added benefit of the new House supporter now to boost the damage. Now, some people might be, again, a little bit curious as to how it works with Decidueye. Basically, how only boosts the damage for your attacks into your opponent's active Pokemon. Decidueye likes to snipe the bench, right, with Pierce the Pain. It's really good. It's a really flexible attack. However, if we Pierce the Pain on the active Pokemon, we can boost the damage up to 130. So that is somewhat relevant. 80 and then 130 should be enough to take a lot of KOs. And that's kind of an upside to Decidueye. We are still pairing it with Pheromosa. We've got the new and upgraded Dartrix, which also has the Skill Dive attack. I think Decidueye is totally fine. We have access to Lilies, we have access to Ericas, we have access to Leaf Capes. I actually think this Pokemon is quite good, and it's going to be quite strong against Silvally Rampardos and a variety of other decks in the format. The only thing I will say right now is that Fire-type decks are exceedingly common in this early format, and so are things like Solgaleo, which might also be a bit of an issue. Maybe not, actually, but either way, Decidueye's 170 HP is actually kind of relevant. It kind of forces us, rather. Sorry, I almost just like choked on something. It forces us rather to have that Leaf Cape, because Solgaleo, even with Lily, will be two-hit KOing us, which is definitely kind of relevant for sure. So Leaf Cape is kind of needed. Leaf Cape and Ericas should keep us out of range of getting two-hit KO'd by Solgaleo, I believe, right? That puts us at 220 with the healing, plus Leaf Cape is 250. Yeah, so that's out of range. So Leaf Cape going to be really required against things like Solgaleo. However, like I was saying, there's still Flareon in the format. There's still the Silvally Fire decks. There's still Charizard. Charizard is very common. And Incineroar, which we'll talk about in a bit, is very common. All of those decks, of course, are going to be hitting for weakness on Decidueye. Definitely makes things a little bit awkward. So Decidueye is really strong against a very specific variety of decks in the format, but I don't know if it'll really catch on, mainly because fire decks are so common. So keep that in mind. I do think Decidueye has been upgraded. I don't think the deck changes that much with the new House supporter card. I think that having this additional option to, reach and do additional damage is good, but we can't really justify playing more than one copy in the deck. Theoretically, we could cut something in here. You could cut one of the Ericas and play two How. I think that would totally be fine. But I think the healing and, the survivability is probably the more, I guess, important aspect of Decidueye in this list, but theoretically How should give us a little bit more reach. Again, I think Decidueye's fine. The deck list hasn't changed around too much. Has seen some early play and some early success, but really nothing too crazy. Like I said, tons of fire Pokemon in the format, but I wanted to talk about Decidueye because a lot of people have been asking about it. We've talked about Primarina. Here's Decidueye, and yes, we will be talking about Incineroar later in this video, which certainly is seeing a lot of play and some success as well. But again, we'll get into that in just a little bit. All right, let's move on. The next thing that we're going to talk about here is, of course, these subscribers. Okay, so we've been doing this in the last couple of videos, and you guys have actually been doing really well. So yes, about 70% of you guys who watched my content are still not subscribed. I've mentioned this the last couple of days in the videos. Things have really gotten a lot better though. We've gained a bunch of subscribers over the last few days, so hopefully this is kind of working, and I do appreciate everybody who has hit that subscribe button. If if you haven't checked, go and look down below. See if you are subscribed to the channel. A lot of people who watch my content just don't hit that subscribe button, and I would definitely recommend it. It's literally free. It doesn't cost anything, and it just supports me, and it supports the channel. So if you watch my content, or if you like my content, and you find these videos helpful to you, consider hitting that subscribe button. I would really appreciate it. Okay, all right, okay. That's 3 in a row. All right, we got to cool it with the shameless plug there. But anyway, next up is going to be Gengar. And yes, I do realize one of the cards is cut off here. That's one giant cape, but this deck list is so big, it's hard to fit. This is Gengar. So, Gengar saw actually a bit of play in last format. There was this really funny kind of Gengar Exodia deck that I like to call it, which was basically you were playing Gengar and you were playing Dusk Noir and you were playing Shiinotic, and it was basically a way for you to theoretically, like in theory, be incredibly difficult or almost impossible to KO under, unless it was like very certain circumstances. Gengar is actually really good in the format right now. It's a counterplay, of course, with its, what is it called? Shadowy Spellbind is this ability's name. It turns off your opponent's ability to play supporter cards. That's really relevant for Silvally decks, but it's going to be very relevant in a variety of decks that, of course, love to play supporters. Supporters are very relevant in the format for sure. The Ultra Beast decks aren't as common, so I don't know if Gengar is necessarily going to be as relevant because turning off Lusamine was also a really big deal, but this was an updated version of Gengar, which is playing Sylveon. So Gengar and Sylveon does make some sense because, of course, it's also a psychic type Pokemon. It draws through your deck a little bit quicker. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this exact like 20 card list, but in theory, this was a deck that did do well in a recent tournament, so I wanted to showcase it. There's some things that I would change around about this deck. Personally speaking, I would probably just play like 2 copies of Eevee and 2 Sylveon, and I would maybe cut like, just some random stuff in the deck here. I would maybe cut like a Sabrina, or I would cut like a Pokecom or something like that, or maybe Mars. I don't know. There's definitely some room to cut for this deck, but theoretically speaking, Gengar with Sylveon should give you some advantage in terms of drawing through your deck a bit quicker, and we can just, of course, play Giratina because Giratina, whenever you're playing it in a Psychic type deck, is certainly quite strong. It allows you to kind of get multiple energies out and kind of dual ramp. So I think that there is something to mention here about Gengar and its new synergy with Sylveon, both being Psychic type Pokemon, Sylveon allowing you to draw through your deck a bit quicker. There's definitely something to do here in terms of Gengar and Sylveon. I haven't put my finger on it, quite yet. I haven't necessarily tested Gengar a ton. Maybe we kind of bring back Dusk Noir. Maybe we just play like a 1-2 Dusk Noir line, or like a something like that. Maybe, and pair it with Sylveon. I'm not sure. It's a lot of Pokemon going around. Gengar has always struggled a little bit just because it's a 3 energy Pokemon that attacks for 100 damage. So if you're going first, that in general feels quite bad. So Giratina definitely feels like it alleviates some of that pressure. But anyway, I wanted to showcase this list. There's one giant cape in there. Just sort of, some theory crafting, just some really quick ideas. Because again, I do think that Gengar can be improved perhaps by the new inclusion of Sylveon. Because I think Sylveon's going to find its way into so many different decks. But if you can fit Sylveon into a deck that is playing Psychic type Pokemon, then honestly, we should have some potential to, be a little bit more consistent and draw a little bit more. One thing I will say, which we don't have in this video because I couldn't kind of nail down a proper deck list, is Mewtwo EX, like the old Genetic Apex Mewtwo with Gardevoir. I think there's a lot of potential to be pairing Sylveon in that particular deck because, of course, it allows you to draw through your deck a bit quicker. But I assume some people would have tried that already with Shiinotic. So, who knows realistically, but maybe we just kind of pair, Sylveon and Shiinotic with Mewtwo and Gardevoir, and maybe just play like Mythical Slabs. I don't know. I'm just kind of going off the rails right now, but definitely some of these older previous Psychic type Pokemon that haven't seen a lot of play in previous, formats have a lot more of an opportunity to be better now with Sylveon. That's kind of what I'm getting at. But anyway, guys, here's Gengar, an updated Gengar list. Again, not something I'm super confident in, but I know some people were kind of curious. Here's Gengar. It actually did quite well last format, but again, I think it was more well positioned in the previous format than it is in this format. So keep that in mind. Anyway, there is Gengar. Next up, we've got Sylveon and Stoutland. So here's another one that I think is kind of interesting. Stoutland, being a colorless Pokemon, also saw some fringe meta success in the previous format. Why not just pair it with Sylveon? Sylveon is, of course, allowing us to draw through our cards pretty effectively. Stoutland is a colorless attacking Pokemon, so we can kind of fit it with Sylveon quite easily. This is going to more quickly allow us to find our, rare candy combo, similar to really all of these kind of rare candy decks that people are pairing Sylveon with. This is kind of one of the few, if not really the only, like stage 2 rare candy colorless Pokemon that's seeing play in the game, so it kind of makes some sense to pair it with Sylveon. I think that's kind of funny. There are some other cards, honestly. I think there's like a Toucannon that could be kind of funny, but Stoutland definitely colorless rare candy stage 2 Pokemon that, some people definitely like to play, and there's some merit to it for sure. We also have Espeon, which synergizes quite well with Stoutland, right? So there we go. Espeon does more damage depending on how many energies attached to all of your opponent's Pokemon. So we could play, of course, maybe some Sabrinas in here or some Repels or something to, of course, go into Stoutland, boost the amount of energy that our opponent has to attach to their Pokemon, and then, force them to just stack up a ton of energies, and then we can go into Espeon, which is doing a lot of damage. That's the whole idea with this deck. It's very interesting. I saw this list and I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense, actually. I quite like it. Espeon has that similar attack effect to things like, I think, like Alakazam or Tapu Lele or Gallade, things like that. So Stoutland does pair quite well with it, and again, like we said, we can play 3 Eevees now and 3 evolutions, so this deck list should be a little bit more fast-paced, should be a little bit more consistent, and I think it's actually a really, really fun strategy. I don't know if it'll really pop off. That's the one thing I will say. We are playing Giant Cape, gonna bring Stoutland up to 160. That should allow us to live an attack from a lot of things in the format, but yeah, it's definitely sort of an interesting proposition here, but I wanted to include it because I thought it was definitely really, really cool. There's gonna be definitely some meta decks in this video, but obviously some decks that maybe are gonna be fringe meta or off meta, so, keep that in mind. Not everything can be the best deck in the game. We're covering a lot of decks in these first few days, and again, this video is all about, updating and upgrading previous deck lists, and I think that this is a pretty cool example of that, but it's not necessarily like Stoutland was never the best deck in Pokemon Pocket, so I don't know if this is going to put it over the top, but definitely some merit here. A very cool deck, some interesting synergy between Espeon, Stoutland, and Sylveon. It's a really fun deck. I think whoever came up with this is actually quite smart. I do like it. I think it's pretty cool. Okay. Anyway, we're going to get into like the last 2 decks of this video are going to be like some heavy hitter decks, because I think that honestly, as far as like the updated and upgraded decks go in this new format, I think the 2 Pokemon that have benefited the most are actually Incineroar and Charizard. So let's talk about Incineroar. I've seen a bunch of different ways of people playing Incineroar, but to be fair, a lot of the ways that people are playing it is still inherently inconsistent. Yes, we do have How, which is going to boost the damage from Incineroar, allowing us to take KOs all over the place. Theoretically does make Incineroar quite better, whether we're playing How on that first turn or second turn going first and boosting our Fire Fang, or we're doing it later in the game to boost the damage from Scar Charged Smash. Either way, I think that Incineroar has been improved pretty heavily. This list is actually just pairing it with Sylveon, and again, Sylveon making every deck a little bit faster, a little bit more consistent. Playing pure fire energies in this deck, I gotta go back, I think I forgot. We're playing psychic energies in this deck, grass energies in this deck, psychic energies in this deck, okay? Of course I forgot. I know some people think it's obvious, but anyway. This deck list is playing pure fire energies because Sylveon just not an attacking Pokemon in this particular deck list. So, similar to Charizard, which we'll take a look at in a little bit, I think that these sort of really strong attacking stage 2 rare candy Pokemon like Charizard, like Incineroar, do benefit from Sylveon. A lot of people have been playing just kind of straight Incineroar, which in my mind is definitely going to be a little bit inconsistent. The downside to be, pairing Sylveon with Incineroar is, of course, that it can't attack. So we're attaching oftentimes an energy to Sylveon or Eevee in the early game if we are leading off with it, which takes away from our kind of pace and our ability to kind of attach and attack with Incineroar. So if we aren't leading with Linton, things can kind of be about a turn behind. But if we do lead with Linton and we get these Eevees on our bench, we can play Sylveons, draw through our deck more quickly, and get that rare candy combination out. So I think that's kind of the bread and butter here for Incineroar. Like I said, I've seen some people pair it with like a variety of different Pokemon. I think Incineroar has a lot of potential. However, I don't think it pairs as well with Sylveon as it does with Charizard. However, Incineroar buffed now with How, the new How supporter. So keep that in mind. I like Incineroar, and it's been seeing a ton of play in the ranked ladder, but inherently I think the deck is a bit inconsistent. All of its sort of tournament data in all of these kind of competitive tournaments over the last few days have had it pretty low on terms of its average win rate, and I think that kind of just comes down to consistency. So the best way that I've seen people play Incineroar in terms of its average win rate and its performance has actually been with Sylveon, and I don't think that's a surprise. I think a lot of these decks are more consistent and just more viable when you pair them with Sylveon, just because they can attack more quickly, and I think that's really just kind of what it comes down to. So here's one version, again, of a deck that did well in a tournament recently. Incineroar is kind of crazy. The upside to Incineroar is that it's actually pretty decent going first and second in various different scenarios. If we're going second, we can, of course, just attach to Linton and then Heat Tackle, doing 30 damage, and also dealing 10 damage to ourselves, which is going to set up later for our Scar Charged Smash attack. That's one of the things with Incineroar, is that you're never doing a ton of damage until you get attacked. However, we can kind of wait until we have Lily on our hand and we can kind of deal some decent damage with Fire Fang. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But if we are going first, we can just kind of Rare Candy and then Fire Fang on our second turn going first with Incineroar. That's very, very strong. So keep that in mind. Incineroar, definitely a high roll deck, something that definitely requires a bit of RNG, but Sylveon hopefully allowing us to get around that a little bit more easily. Here's Incineroar. Again, seeing a ton of play. This is just the version that I chose to show. A couple of different ways you could play just like straight Incineroar, nothing else. You could play like Silvally. You could play Turtonator still. There's a lot of different ways that we can play Incineroar. I think that this version most recently has done the best. So that's why I'm including it in this video. Comment down below what you guys think of Incineroar in this new format. I think it's kind of broken. I really do. And then last, but certainly not least, is going to be Charizard. As my phone rings. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Yeah, last but not least is going to be Charizard. And we're not editing that out. We don't edit our YouTube videos, so I probably should have put my phone on silent. That's my bad. Last but not least, we have Charizard, okay? Charizard is broken. And I think that, honestly, this might end up being one of the most polarizing decks in this entire format. Sylveon has found its way into a lot of different decks, and a lot of them are really, really strong. A lot of the decks from previous formats have gotten better. The same decks from previous formats that haven't even changed much are still good. Silvally Rampardos is everywhere. Solgaleo is everywhere. Giratina Darkrai is everywhere. However, Charizard seems to be one of the few decks that has gotten significantly better with the inclusion of Sylveon. This deck list has been kind of carrying me through ranked battles. One story that I'll just tell real quick is that when ranked battles came out, I was like, you know what? Because win streaks are here, I feel a little bit more confident playing a bunch of random new decks, testing a bunch of stuff in Ultra Ball rank. If I lose some games, it's not a big deal. And that's kind of what I did. I went in, tried basically everything there was to try, lost a bunch of games in Ultra Ball, and I had a terrible win rate over my first like 50 games or so, and I was a little bit sad. I was like, you know what? A lot of these decks didn't end up being that good. I've tried almost everything there is to try, so now I'm going to try to play some of the decks that I thought were good. And then I landed on Charizard, and I thought to myself, you know what? Playing these high roll decks in ranked battles right now is probably a pretty good decision. It's probably a smart move because RNG decks like this are very easily able to go on win streaks because they're not really matchup dependent. You kind of just win games based around drawing cards, and it's not really about what you're going up against. So playing Charizard, I ended up going on several massive win streaks throughout Ultra Ball, and then found my way immediately in Master Ball just after like an hour or two, and it was absolutely insane. Charizard is crazy. This is a deck list that just feels like it's way too fast and way too consistent. There's so many times, I can't tell you how many times I got that second turn Stoke Charizard off because it happens so often. Going second, we can lead with Eevee, and then we can just end our turn by attaching to Eevee and then drawing a card with Collect. We can also, if we're going first, just lead with Charmander, bench an Eevee. Sylveon allows us to just draw so many cards. Charizard EX should not be able to draw 6 cards in one turn, plus the draws from Pokeball, that could potentially be 8 cards in one turn. I've had games where I've had literally 0 cards in my deck by turn 4 or turn 5. It is absolutely the most ridiculous thing that I have ever seen. Now, we'll have to wait and see from a win rate perspective if Charizard ends up doing well. We are playing one of the Flamethrower Genetic Apex Flareons in the deck, mainly just because of Oricorio. So if Oricorio and things like Magnezone or, whatnot become a little bit more popular, then, sure, Charizard might struggle a little bit. But inherently, I think this deck is just broken, and I don't know really what the developers were thinking giving Sylveon to Charizard. It just kind of goes together crazily. Like I said, Sylveon can be a bit of a liability, right? Because we're not attacking with it. We're playing only fire energies for this deck list, and of course, Sylveon can get KO'd quite easily, so you got to keep that in mind. But Charizard is able to KO things very easily, things like Solgaleo, things like Rampardos, things like Giratina Darkrai. So many Pokemon in the format just get absolutely steamrolled by the Steam Artillery attack from Charizard EX. So being more consistently able to get into Charizard early just makes this deck that much better. We're still playing 2 copies of Lily, 2 Research, 2 Pokeball, 2 Rare Candy, 1 Sabrina, 1 Mars, 1 Giant Cape. One thing that I might recommend is swapping Sabrina out for things like Guzma. A lot of these Incineroar decks are playing Rocky Helmet. A lot of these Solgaleo decks are playing Giant Cape. So I do think that Guzma has some place in a deck list like this, especially in this current format. But either way, guys, this to me is one of the craziest outcomes of this entire format. it depends on like how you're looking at things, right? Because I think a lot of the best decks in the formats are decks that haven't really changed that much, but at the same time, some of the best decks in the format are decks that just have been paired with Sylveon and now they're way faster. And I also think that Sylveon's found its way into a few new archetypes, predominantly being things like that Giratina Greninja combination, which I guess really isn't a new archetype. We could have actually talked about it in this video, but I talked about it in the first video, the best decks for ranked mode, because to be fair, early on in this format, just like a spoiler alert, that is by far the most successful deck, and I think it's really good, and I think a big part of that is because of Sylveon. So yeah, I think we're going to see Sylveon paired in almost every deck at the top of the metagame, just because the effect is so ridiculous. I don't know who really thought putting Sylveon EX in a game that already had 2 Professor's Research, 2 Pokeballs, and only a 20-card deck list. To me, it just seems a little bit ridiculous, and I think that this format, and maybe some upcoming formats as well, are really just going to be all about playing Sylveon and what cards you can pair with a Sylveon, because it's just going to make your deck that much faster. So anyway, I think Charizard benefits a ton from Sylveon. That's my spiel about it. Absolutely insane. I've gone on some insane win streaks with Charizard, and like the thing with Charizard is like, it's not like it's complex. Like, it's not like there's a ton of decisions to be made when you're playing this deck. It's kind of fundamentally simple and very linear. So just making a linear deck that's simple to play and strong, much more fast-paced and consistent, just seems crazy to me. I don't know. But maybe this deck really won't catch on. Maybe it won't end up being like super crazy. Again, we'll have to see. But I feel like this deck is crazy in my honest opinion. So anyway, guys, there's the video. Those are all of my upgraded deck lists, at least early on in this format. Comment down below if there's anything you think I missed, anything that you would like to mention. Yeah, I would love to hear your guys' opinions about this. This deck's playing Pure Fire Energies. I don't know if I mentioned that either. But anyway, there it is. That's going to wrap up sort of our 3-part video series about, the best decks, best upgraded decks, the best new decks, and the best decks for ranked mode. I think we've covered basically everything new that there is to cover, other than that Flareon Leafeon deck, which we'll save for a future time. That popped up in the last couple of days. But anyway, yeah, there it is. Yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. Hopefully these videos have been helpful. Hopefully your ranked grind is a bit easier now with the win streaks and all of the new decks and the stuff that we've showcased in these videos. Hopefully you guys have an easier time. And yeah, stay tuned, because tomorrow will be Meta Monday, so you're going to want to stay tuned for that. You're going to want to see what the results are from the first large tournament of the Eevee Grove format. It's going to be definitely interesting to see which decks end up doing well, and then we'll go into our tier list on Tuesday. All good stuff that I'm excited for. You're not going to want to miss it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Join the Discord as well. Link will be down in the description below. We've got almost 1,000 people in the Discord. It's a really fun place to hang out. So if you want to talk to us and other players and showcase your deck lists, find trades, things like that, it's a great place to come hang out. Link will be down in the description below. Join the Discord. It's a good time. All right, let's get out of here, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. Thanks for watching. And yeah, bye.